Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all well, and thank you so much for joining us for what promises to be an inspiring evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tammi Faraday, and I'm incredibly honoured to be here tonight in conversation with Esther Malka Groner, to be able to explore her amazing personal journey, as well as gain an insider's clarity into the fiercely private, post-Holocaust, ultra-Orthodox Hasidic community that has been portrayed in the worldwide phenomenon that is Netflix's Unorthodox. Before we commence, tonight marks the eve of National Reconciliation Week, and we would like to respectfully acknowledge the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation and recognise their traditional connections to the lands we are on. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Many of us know Esther Malka as the human dynamo she is, the founder and director of Chabad Glen Eira, a highly esteemed community leader, the beloved wife of Rabbi Mendy Groner, the mother of 8, yes, 8, and now Bubby or Grandma extraordinaire. What many of you don't know is that, like Esty Shapiro, the female protagonist in Unorthodox, based on Deb Wildman's memoir, Esther Malka herself hails from the Satmar community of Williamsburg. Unlike Esty, however, what makes Esther Malka's journey from Brooklyn to Melbourne all the more remarkable is that despite dedicating her life to Jewish observance, outreach, and instilling a love of Judaism in all those whose lives she touches, Esther Malka and her family were excommunicated from the Satmar community. It's important that we preface this evening by saying tonight's not a night of intentionally besmirching a community that is so incredibly foreign to so many of us, but it's rather to shed some genuine light and gain some profound understanding. We are coming to this conversation from a place of compassion and authentic curiosity. And it's in that spirit that I am so privileged to welcome Esther Malka.
Thank you, Tammi. And welcome to everyone. And thank you, Tammi, and for putting me at ease. I've never had this conversation with anybody. I've never spoken about it on such a big scale. At the moment, we have 497 participants, and it seems like it keeps growing. And so thank you for putting me at ease to be able to tell my story, and welcome to everybody. And I think it's an incredible world we live in, and hopefully you're all safe and sound and staying healthy and protected. But in a way, it's quite incredible how the borders have closed, yet in cyberspace, all the borders have opened. We can now join into so many Zoom things that we've never had the opportunity before. Everything is on Zoom these days, and it's really great. I also want to thank Tony for his incredible help with all the tech work, which is amazing, and for giving us so much of his time. And I also want to welcome my sister Rivka. Hopefully she woke up for this. It's 6 a.m. in New York. She lives in Buffalo, New York. And she has gone, although younger than me, she has gone through with us, with our family, all the journeys. And I'd like to welcome her by joining here today. So thank you.
Beautifully said. Look, just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm sure you're all zoomed out, which makes the attendance tonight all the more astonishing. But you will see at the bottom of your screen there is a Q&A button. Please feel free to ask whatever questions you like. And with courage and candour and grace in spades, Esther Malka will endeavour to answer as many questions as we can possibly get through towards the end of our conversation. So without further ado, Esther Malka, I worked out this week that I've known you since I was 17 years old.
Really? Okay.
Just a few years ago. And yet I never knew until very, very recently that this Jewish beacon before me was born and raised in the Satmar community. Can you explain to us, first of all, how this community came to be?
Okay, so this community is mainly a post-Holocaust community. They originate from the city of Satmar in Romania, then Romania, now Hungary, and they were a prominent community. But once they immigrated post-Holocaust to Williamsburg, predominantly to Williamsburg, New York, they have grown in enormous proportion. In fact, the latest numbers were 320,000 of them. They're one of the largest Hasidic sects there are. So they're very much a a post-Holocaust community originating from Hungary/Romania, etc. So that's their community where they came from. And so the majority are Holocaust survivors, and I think that's why the community is very much defined by that, meaning they're a very insular community. And the reason I think why they're an insular community so much is because there's a few reasons, but one of the main reasons are because they very much want to protect what they had from, and in order to protect what they had from before the war, before the Holocaust, because I remember as a child always referring to, as they would call it, in den Heim, you know, how they did it at home. What did we do? How did we do it? In order to preserve that they had to, in their eyes, close off anything that sheds a bit of a threat to their community. And therefore, there was no TV, no internet. They have their own newspapers. If they do have internet, they need it for business. It's heavily filtered. So they really want to protect themselves in order to remain that. And the other thing is that they very much believe that the Holocaust came as a punishment for assimilation. And therefore, in order to make sure that we don't assimilate, we have to protect ourselves and therefore stay insular. So that's the community that I come from. We spoke only Yiddish. I'll go later into my education, but predominantly it was Yiddish. And then, in addition to Yiddish, we learned some English as well, but there's a lot of extreme rules. I believe that the rules are more extreme after the Holocaust, again, as to protect themselves as before. So they have a lot of extreme rules of how to do things and what to do it and when to do it and all of that. Having said that, they have a lot of I'm going to just say that we'll reach the 500 limit, but we're going to have a recording. Hopefully it's going to be streamed on Facebook Live. Those who still want to join in. So having said that they were so eager to rebuild. A lot of them got married, like today's day and age, a lot of them got married at 17, 18. In my parents' time, children were getting married at the age of 17 because they were so eager to rebuild families and to have many children in order to rebuild what they have lost.
So it was very much a community born of a trauma and trying to redress the horrors of the Holocaust and preserve what they had.
Absolutely.
So what was life like growing up in Williamsburg? What was home life like for you?
Okay, so just to give a bit of background, my mother was born in the city of Satmar, which honestly, it can't get more Satmar than that. She was born in the city. So she was born in that city, and she very much, her family was very close to the Satmar Rebbe. They lived before the war in the city of Satmar. They lived in a two-story building. My grandparents lived upstairs. They lived downstairs. So even after the war, they were very, very close to the Satmar Rebbe's family. In fact, I remember as a young child going to play in the Satmar Rebbe's house because my grandmother was just chatting with the Satmar Rebbe, and so I was there just hanging around, kind of thing, the tag along. So that was my parents were born both in 1947. And my father was born, my mother's family was very much very much entrenched in the Satmar community. Like really, they're a prominent family. They were very involved. They were really, big shots in the Satmar. Not big shots in an arrogant way. They were very involved. Some of my uncles would compose the Satmar songs, and my mother was heavily involved in all. They do a lot of chesed, which is a lot of charity work. For example, even now with the corona, they were the ones that started the plasma drive. And they very much do a lot of that charity work, and therefore, my mother was always heavily involved in that. My father, on the other hand, was born in Budapest. They immigrated from a Hungarian family, Hasidic family. They immigrated to 1956 to Toronto. So by definition, having immigrated to Toronto, they were kind of like less involved, so to speak. They were involved, they were Satmar, but once my father went to study in a Satmar yeshiva, and once he went to Satmar yeshiva, and my parents got married, got engaged at the age of 17, got married at the age of 18, they became much more Satmar. That's when my grandfather put on that strimal that you saw on Unorthodox, and that's when they became a lot more involved. So my parents met they had a 50 minutes for show, just like in Unorthodox, and they had twice a 15 minutes for show, and then they were married. They were engaged for a year. They didn't see each other for the whole year. They didn't talk for the whole year, and they got married, and I was born close to 3 years later. So
what was growing up life like for you? What was it like to live in this community?
Okay, so for me, growing up in the community, I'm the oldest of 7 children. So 2 of the 7 children were born post-Satmar era, as we call it in our family. So they knew nothing of all, I mean, obviously they know now, but they knew nothing of that time. They didn't experience any of that time. So they grew up we grew up 5 children in the community. A beautiful relationship. They are so loving, so respectful of each other. They have built a beautiful home. I grew up in a really happy home, very happy. I was very happy in the community. I didn't know anything else, so to speak. My family life was great. We were very close. And because it was a post-Holocaust community, everybody was kind of became our aunts and uncles. And we were quite involved with each other. It was really a very happy home, very happy family, very happy community life. I went to school. By the way, when I say that my mother organized all these events, I used to, being her daughter, I'm not sure I had such a beautiful voice. According to my children, I definitely didn't. But I used to go and sing in all the choirs and do these plays, and we were all very involved in the community life. So when I was a child, I went to, obviously I was in a Satmar school, and it was quite extraordinary thinking back. We didn't wear a uniform. Our education was very simple, so to speak. We had a very basic Jewish studies education, surprisingly enough. We didn't learn any text-based. And the reason for why we didn't learn any text-based, like Chumash or the prophets or anything like that, was they actually don't believe that a woman's role is to learn the Torah. They believe that a woman's role is primarily in the home, to raise a family, to have children, and they do it really, really well. They take a lot of pride in how they do it, and they really view it with a lot of pride. They don't view it as, oh, I'm supposed to do that and I wish I could. So they had a very basic general studies education, but I had an education. I was there till the end of 8th grade, and it's funny, we spoke to each other only in Yiddish. We wore very plain colored clothes. I never learned to ride a bike. I don't think the boys learned to ride a bike either. So to this day, I see all these families biking around Melbourne, and I'm actually quite jealous. That's one of my goals, to teach myself how to learn how to ride a bike, but I never had an opportunity to do that. So I never learned how to ride a bike. In fact, I even never learned how to swim, because in the swimming pools we used to go to, they were always so crowded that there was no room for swimming. There was room for soaking in the water, so to speak. I always wore plain colors, like I said, and to this day, I can wear black, because who can't wear black? But I cannot, I find it very hard to wear navy. I love orange. I can wear orange all day because it's just bright, it's just happy, and it makes me feel very free. Even the books. So the first day we came, we used to have these books that we used to have to censor ourselves. So we sat with a black magic marker and a black texter, and we just crossed out. Like we crossed out, it said Jack and Jill went up the hill, so he crossed out Jack because it shouldn't be a boy and a girl going up the hill. It should be just a girl. Like, you can't have boys and girls mixing with each other. So we actually sat and censored our own book, which, thinking back, is the most ironic thing because we read it, obviously, while we were doing that. So that was my schooling. I found that the women in the community, my aunts, my mother, were always treated with a lot of respect. And I want to come back to that later about women generally in Judaism being treated with respect. So that was basically my childhood. Happy-go-lucky, had lots of friends. It's just a happy, healthy childhood.
So, Esther Malka, how did you come to leave the community? What was your father's journey? Because this all centered around your father's quest. So, what was your father's journey?
Okay, so my father's journey was a very interesting one, and I think a very precious one, because going back many years, nobody else did it at the time. He was really the first one to do it. He was really a loner, so to speak, to do it. So I give him a lot of credit. I'm eternally grateful to him. So I do remind him from time to time. So it's actually, I find it quite fascinating. So my father's a very curious type. He's a very curious, he's a deep thinker. He's very learned. He likes to explore, and he's never happy with status quo. And that goes with everything, you know, whether it comes to health, or we always laugh at home that he's always up to a new shtick. Like, what's now? Is it cutting up the onion and putting it around the room? Or, you know, he's always an explorer. He always likes to, you know, look into different things. And so he was looking for something. And because he was looking for something, he actually found the first Chabad book on Chabad philosophy is called the Tanya. So he found that book on his own. He didn't, and he started reading it. So not having any background in Kabbalah or mysticism, he didn't quite understand all of it, so to speak. And he had no one to ask, because no one is allowed to find out, you know, what's really going on. He's outside his community. Remember, everybody that doesn't look like you, everybody that isn't exactly like you is considered an outsider, is considered a threat. So he wasn't sure what to do. So when he was, we used to go every summer. I'm sure many people have heard about, in New York, they go to the Catskills, and they go up to the mountains to spend the summer there. So my parents didn't quite do that. They went to New Hampshire, and that's where they used to go and spend the summer. And a very important part of it is that my father used to have what he did. He had like a small high school. That's what he ran, like almost like a private high school for really incredibly talented boys. So he decided to. He always took them along, like just to have a whole summer. New York is very muggy and hot. Having the summer and spend some time, you know, studying and just doing what they do. So there were a lot of visitors coming to New Hampshire from all different communities, and he met a Chabad rabbi, Chabad chassid. And when he met him, he said to him, "Oh, can I ask you some questions about Chabad? What does this mean in the Tanya? What does that mean in the Tanya?" And the Chabad said, "Look, I can answer." The Chabad chassid, the Chabad guy, said to him, "Look, I'll answer you whatever I can, but I will put you on to a guy that is just brilliant." A guy, his name was Rabbi Khan, Rabbi Yoel Khan. He actually is still alive. He's over 90 now. And he is the epic of a Chabad philosopher. He can teach you, he can explain to you. So my father reached out to him. And in the beginning, when he reached out to him, he wasn't sure, he wasn't sure how. He decided he's going to go every Thursday night. He's going to go to him secretly between the hours 2 and 5 in the morning and learn Chabad philosophy. At that point, they were only learning Chabad philosophy. Now, credit to my father, he didn't do anything behind my mother's back. Whatever he learned, he taught her. And the same with his students. He included them in what he had learned. And what absolutely blew. So from Chabad philosophy, they started text-based. They started learning about what is the Chabad philosophy in general? What is Judaism all about? Because so my father was completely blown away. And the reason why he was blown away is because all his life, what he studied was always that was more like a belief-based religion, a belief-based Judaism. And what he found with Chabad is all of a sudden this passionate Judaism, this joyous Judaism, this happy Judaism, and more than that is that he was allowed to ask questions. He was allowed to, and the view that he felt, that the depth of it, the view of what a Jew is, what a human being is, what God is. All of a sudden there's so much depth rather than just doing what you have to do because you have to do it. He was able to explore a very happy and positive, and God was all of a sudden like such a positive. It wasn't driven by fear-based, which Satmar is, but it was driven more. I'm not saying there's no joy, there's a lot of joy there, but the philosophy of Judaism is rich, is happy, is every day you wake up with a passion and with a joy and the view of, it doesn't matter what another human being does. It's what his soul is, who he is, and every mitzvah, every good thing that a person does is positive, is amazing, is incredible. And that's what he loved, and he was completely blown away from it.
I think it's probably important at this point because we've got a very broad audience tonight. Chabad is also a sect of Hasidic practice, but what is the difference between, I know you've touched on it, so the Satmar community was a very insular community. They certainly weren't looking to bring anybody into their ranks. They wanted to swell their own ranks, but they weren't necessarily wanting to attract others into it. So much so that when we was talking, you were saying to me that that they actually didn't accept Chabad as being effectively Jewish. The Satmar community was a community unto itself, and their perception was that it was the Jewish community, and anything that wasn't that was considered to effectively not be part of their community at all.
Absolutely. If you didn't look like them and you didn't sound like them, you weren't them. You weren't the authentic Jew that you were meant to be. You might have been somewhere on the spectrum, but not an authentic Jewish person. And that's what that was a really painful thing. Once my father started exploring other things to see that. So not only do they view any human being or any Jewish person that way, they also viewed Chabad as a threat to their Judaism. So no one ever joined the Satmar. There's plenty of people that join other Hasidic groups. No one ever joins them. It's not encouraged. They don't really want. They're happy with their own and they want to stay that way. So yes, correct.
So as your father went on this exploration journey to find the meaning in his Judaism and to find the connection in it, and clearly finding the light in every Jewish soul, what then happened? What went from this exploration and this double life, I could possibly say, that he was living, by living as a Satmar Jew but doing this clandestine studying in the middle of the night? What then happened that led to your family's excommunication from this community?
Okay, so before I go into that, I just want to tell you where I came into the picture. It started before I was 12 years old, obviously, but when I was 12 years old, I discovered it. And the way I discovered it, to my horror, I walked into my father's study and saw some books on the table. See, he had built a cupboard within a cupboard to hide all the books on Kabbalah, all the books on Chabad mysticism. And he didn't realize, obviously, that I was going to walk in. And I walked in, and it was on the table. And with it were some Jewish magazines of, Chabad magazines. And I realized then that he's involved in something other than Satmar. And the fear and the horror that I experienced was just unbelievable, because here was my father who I adored, and I thought he was the best guy on planet Earth. Always wanted to marry someone like my father, especially when I was a little girl. And all of a sudden, this guy's veering off the path. So my father had a lot of patience, and he did a lot of explaining. But what he did more was he hired a teacher, and she taught me. New York name is Ruth Kislanam, and she secretly came. When I say secretly, she used to actually shop in Williamsburg. I don't know why, but she did. And if I ever saw her on the street, she wouldn't acknowledge me. So she secretly came in a cab, quietly came into the house, and she used to teach me. It was the first time in my life that I started having an appreciation of what Judaism is, and the depth of it, and the knowledge of it, and the understanding of obviously we can't understand God, but I was encouraged to ask questions, and I was encouraged to connect to something much bigger than myself. And when I understood that, it was an eye-opener. So I relaxed a bit, and I accepted what has been before in front of me. So I was very excited about it secretly, but there was a lot to come. So what happened was that my father, we were very fortunate, or maybe not so fortunate, whatever it was, that our Williamsburg, if anybody wants to take a virtual tour about Williamsburg, one day there are people that do it. Now they can't because of the corona, or if you ever go to New York, it's a fascinating community. But part of the, in addition to Hasidim being there, they also have a lot of hipsters living there. But that was not in my time. So we lived at the edge of the edge of Williamsburg. So my parents walked one Simchat Torah, not my parents, my father walked one Shabbat morning, one Simchat Torah morning. He walked to Williamsburg. He walked to Crown Heights. Now, just by a side note, when they came back, we were all on a journey. We were trying to understand. We were loving this new philosophy, this new semi-lifestyle. But I was kind of confused, not sure what was happening. Have had a lot of talk in my head over the years. Nobody changes in one day with whatever new journey you take. So at that time, my brother came home with a lolly bag, and I said to him, from the shul, and I said to him, surely you can't eat it. It's not kosher. And so I had the view that anyone that's not like us is not Jewish enough, is not kosher enough. Unfortunately, one of my neighbors discovered, and there was another time that my father went to some gathering and he came in the middle of the night. Anyways, they started being suspicious. It leaked out. I'm not sure to whom, but it leaked out. And parents started pulling it. The first thing that happened to us once people started finding out that we had joined, and not even joined, but even are looking elsewhere.
Even entertained, being part of or connected to.
Exactly. So what happened was the boys started, all the parents pulled their boys out of yeshiva, and they also had found out they had learned some of the philosophy, so they started being really nervous that they'll be contaminated, so to speak. And they pulled them out of the yeshiva, so out of this high school, and we had to move from Williamsburg to Borough Park. And just to explain, Borough Park is also a very ultra-Orthodox community, but a little bit more relaxed. So we thought we'll find peace there. But unfortunately, so that was the end. I was like 4 years old. Primary school, elementary school in Satmar, and then we decided to move. So at that point, I actually give my parents credit for that. They were quite, this is many years ago, and my mom said to me, my parents said to me, we're living now in Borough Park. You have a choice. You can go back to your old Satmar school. You can go to a new Satmar school, or you can choose another school to go to. Not Chabad. Chabad was way too overwhelming at that point. We were in transition. So she said to me, and she said, I'm just warning you, whether you go back to your old Satmar school or you choose the new Satmar school, you will be thrown out at one point. And so I chose to go to another school, which was like a Hasidic school, but not quite, Anyway, I chose to go to that school. And to me, I must be honest, that was the hardest part of everything. At that point, our family stopped talking to us. My father's side of the family, my grandparents were always quite amazing. They didn't understand why we were doing what we were doing, but they were okay about it. I wouldn't say they were encouraging, but they were tolerant and kept the communication, kept the relationship going. My father's side of the family also, they were quite incredible. My mother's side of the family, as I said to you before, they were quite entrenched in the Satmar community, and therefore they didn't want to have a bar of us. They tried their luck. They came and tried to convince us, but we weren't budging, and they were very upset, and they cut off all ties with us. So I lost all my friends, and we were a quite prominent family in the community, so we lost a lot. I personally lost I lost everybody, really. I lost my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my friends, everybody. I joined this new school, and to me that was really hard, because thinking back at my old self, I was probably quite socially awkward. I hadn't spoken to anybody outside my own community. I wore 2 plaits. I dressed different probably. My English wasn't great. My education was terrible. I needed a lot of tutors. And I walked into a high school. We all know that high school years are so important. I walked in, and I knew nobody. So when I walked in, I slowly...
Is it true, Esther Malka, that your mother was actually encouraged to divorce your father because of the shame that it had brought on the family?
Absolutely. So at one point, my father went to Israel. My parents went to Israel to check out, which I'll get to in a minute. But absolutely, I spoke to my mother the other day, and she said she was offered $1 million to divorce my father. Thankfully, that didn't happen. So
doesn't sound that bad, but
yeah,
in the context of what we're talking about, it's pretty terrible.
It was a lot of money, but thankfully. So anyway, so when I was in that high school, so we were living in Borough Park, and this is always the gory part, which I find quite emotional to talk about, is that it came to a point that there were lots of, excommunication activities that were going on. That we were shunned, flyers were going out about us, and the demonstrations in front of our, here you get off the right path and leave us and all that. Anyway, so at the end, not at the end, well, that was the beginning of the end. My father left the house one morning, and he was kidnapped into a van. That Moshe that you saw in Unorthodox actually happened to us, and that was the part that I find quite emotional watching. Unfortunately, he was beaten. His beard was cut off, which was a horrific act, and he was thrown out of... They knew that they were being chased by the police, because we had called the police, and he was thrown out, and eventually had to go to hospital, and it was there for a while. Now, because of that, we had to leave the States, because we got threat letters saying, if you don't leave, this is just the beginning. So we had to leave the States. We moved to Israel. And in Israel was a whole new life. I had to learn Hebrew. I only learned how to, I knew how to pray, so I knew how to read Hebrew, but I didn't know how to speak Hebrew. But it was, that excommunication was like a no looking back point. And for me, it opened up a million new doors. It meant that I went to Chabad High School, meant all our kids, and we started having an education. We started having a opportunities open up. I finished high school. I got a degree. I got, and it was amazing opportunities. I knew, I started formulating what I wanted in my life. I knew I wanted to have a life that I can, you know, I can actually not lead a life outside my kitchen. I didn't want my kitchen. I wanted outside my kitchen to lead a life that I can be with people and hopefully have an impact and wake up every morning to think, you know, what can I do today to actually make a difference in someone else's life. And all, I want to finish with that story, but I just want to close that story as well. So my wedding was the point that my grandparents still didn't speak to us, or my family, very little. And at that point, when I came, I did come back to New York to a point. It was actually, my brother had an idea. He spent this summer with my mentee, and he thought it was a good idea to meet him. Mentee at that point didn't want to go out with me because in his mind, I was probably way too Satmar for him. Don't worry, I didn't let him live it down ever. For that, no. But eventually he did go out with me, and we got, we went out, we dated, we got engaged, and my grandfather met him for the first time, and I was quite blown away because in his mind, who was I going to marry? I was so old anyways, I was 22. So who was I going to marry? So he was quite impressed that here he is, you know, religious, knowledgeable, impressionable guy, and he did end up coming to our wedding. I was dreading it, to be honest, but it almost was a turning point. And once they saw who we were and what we were, they actually changed. Their perspective changed, and slowly the relationship started coming back. And I must say, for me, this is many years later, about 13 years ago, 20 years after I've left, if not more. I was in New York, and one of my friends made a class reunion for me, and my whole class was there. And
goosebumps.
My whole Satmar class was there, and girls that one of my best friends had literally. There's my class reunion. One of my friends had thrown me out of the house 20 years earlier, and she said to me, "Please leave. I cannot have someone like you in my house." And she came. She drove for 2 hours to meet up with me, and I saw that their attitude and their perspective and the whole view, the world had opened up. Internet, as much as they shun it, it's infiltrating. Slowly, their attitude has changed, and now we're in very close connection to my family. They come to all our simchas when we're in New York. They kind of have a new appreciation of who we are, and the one thing I want to add is the Moshe in our story. A few years ago, my parents were in Williamsburg and for Shabbat, and he knocked on the door, and my uncles did not want to let him in, but my father said, "Just let him in." And he came, and he just broke down. He was sobbing, apologizing for everything that he's done. And my father said to him, "You know, don't apologize to me. I'm an individual. You've actually done this to an entire community. So perhaps go to the Rebbe's graveside and ask him for forgiveness. He's the leader of the community." So a lot of circles have closed. There's been a lot of closure, and I'm eternally grateful for what happened. It defined me. It's who I am, and yeah. That's my story in a nutshell, but everyone's very, feel free to ask any questions you have.
It's extraordinary. We're just going to touch on briefly, obviously, on Unorthodox and how you experienced watching that. I'm also very conscious. I just want to assure our audience that are with us tonight that it was advertised as 8 till 9 o'clock. We are more than happy to go over, and we have some latitude with that. So even if my conversation with Esther Malka continues for a little bit longer, we will certainly get to your questions. So please stay tuned. You've spoken so eloquently about your background and about your story, but I mean, and had you been in the Satmar community, you probably would never have watched Unorthodox. That goes without saying. But can you give me a sense of what it was like to have watched it? Did it resonate with you? Was it a faithful depiction of the community you grew up in?
Okay, so some of it was very much so, but I have to stress that it was not a picture of orthodoxy in general. Satmar is a community of its own, and therefore I was conscious when I was watching it that I hope people out there watching don't think that orthodoxy is like this, and especially women in orthodoxy, especially intimacy in orthodoxy is like this, because it's not. So I'll go into maybe a few details later. First of all, Shira Haas is unbelievable. She is just one in a million. And it's really such a heartbreaking story. And it was, even when I read the book years ago, it is heartbreaking from beginning to end. There's no question about it. Some of it was quite good. Some of it I had to laugh about. The Yiddish was not great. I mean, I laughed. I laughed a lot about the Yiddish. I laughed about the Streimelch. Apparently they didn't want to spend all that money, but it looked quite fake. It was like glue. It looked like it had glue all over it. And so some of it, this is just actually live quite nicely in they spend a lot of time and thought on the way they dress and their furniture. So that it was quite poorly represented. But what I was upset about and I'm sure also, like, for example, the silver foil. Yes, we cover our homes on Pesach, but we don't cover it that much. We cover it because we don't want Passover. Passover. We don't want any breadcrumbs we don't eat any bread, and we don't have any, or somebody don't want it to have, we don't want it to be around, so we cover it and all that. But a lot of it was very, very, very true, but not everything. It was way too much silver foil there. I mean, the light bulbs don't have to be covered, and definitely not the toilet seats. But a lot of it was very, very true. The part that upset me about is that I didn't think, and I understand why they did it, because there was no joy. Even the wedding was so nebbish. It was like there was no joy in that came through. A community by definition is a sense of belonging, a sense of joy, a sense of festivities and family and noise, and it was so quiet. It was none of that came through, and it was a shame. But I guess, if that would be the case, then it would be a documentary and not a film that has, excitement and, like a storyline. So that's what kind of didn't, was lacking.
I'm going to try and run through some of these questions, as I said, because I desperately want to get to the Q&A part. But for our audience who's watching tonight, and for whom the Satmar community is probably completely alien, what clarity can you provide? What light can you shed on the following things? As we go, how are women in these communities genuinely treated? You have touched upon it, but from your experience, how are women in this community viewed, and how would they treat it?
Okay, so they don't have, there's two things. There's one is what they're allowed to do, and the other thing is how they're treated. So they're treated very well with a lot of respect. In fact, in Jewish law, a husband is supposed to respect his wife more than he respects himself. He's supposed to love her as he loves himself, but respect her more. So it's something that is imbued in them. At the same time, they don't have the opportunities. They don't have the opportunities that we have. They don't go to college. They don't have a proper degree. Like I said before, their goal is to be a Jewish homemaker and have families and have children, but they do it with a lot of pride. So they do not have the opportunities that most women have out there. Definitely most Orthodox women. So, but they are treated, from my experience, they're treated generally with a lot of respect. Is there abuse? Is absolutely, just like there is in every community. But in general, as a whole, they're treated with respect as a community philosophy.
No one who's watched Unorthodox could ever forget Shira Huss's impeccable acting, particularly in that scene where her head is being shaved, you know, against the backdrop of her childhood bedroom with the next generation of young girls watching on. Why are women's heads shaved? Or are women's heads shaved?
Okay, so generally in Orthodox women, their heads are not shaved. In fact, it's shunned upon. However, in the extreme communities, their head is shaved. So there's a few reasons why they shave their head. I was mortified. I cried with her when I watched it. However, I think in reality, the younger generation, from my understanding, it's a private thing. Okay. The reason why the head is shaved is because a Jewish woman, her head is supposed to be, once she's married, her head is supposed to be covered. And once if her hair is shaven, there's no hair that can possibly be seen because her hair is covered. Also, when a woman goes to the mikveh, which I might touch upon later, her entire body, including the hair, is supposed to be under the water. That mikveh scene was a little bit of a very unjoyful scene, which I might touch upon later. And another historic reason, which I heard, that in ancient times, I guess many hundreds, probably years ago, coming back to the mikveh, that if they don't have hair, obviously their whole body is under the water, and then it's, you know, one of the reasons I heard was the Lord used to sleep with the brides before they got married. So in order to not, you know, obviously no one wants to sleep with an ugly looking woman. To stop that, they started shaving their heads. So a lot of them do it, but most Orthodox women do not do it. They have beautiful hair underneath their wigs or scarves or whatever they're wearing to cover their hair.
Okay. Please, I know you forgive sensitivity of the question. It would be remiss of us not to address it because this is a transparent, open forum. We really need to explore in Unorthodox. Is passion in a marriage forbidden? If you're watching this for the first time, some of the detractors have said it's like you could liken it to an assault. Others have taken it further and said it looks like, you know, voyeuristically, it looks like a religiously sanctioned rape. This is not the Jewish law that I was taught, but you are much more of a font of knowledge when it comes to this. Can you please provide some clarity for the people watching tonight about what Jewish law says about marital intimacy?
Okay, I must say, probably like everybody else, I was absolutely right to watch that scene. It is so sad to anybody that had that experience, and I don't doubt for a second that that was her experience. And I'm sure that there might be the experience of some people in that community, as people have sexual issues within any community. And also, let's not forget that their sex ed is very, very limited. So they probably learn it was correct. They obviously learn it at a very late age, and therefore, and also they get married very young. So when you get married at 18, you don't even know your own body. You don't even know what you're doing. They've never spoken to a woman. They met for 15 minutes. So obviously the relationship takes time to build up, especially when it comes to intimacy, the relationship in general. But so it was very heartbreaking, very dysfunctional, clearly that they have a real issue that needed to be addressed. Why he went to his mother to address, he was an 18, never gone, he should have gone for proper help rather than obviously going to the mother-in-law and then her meddling into their bedroom life. But I just want to, this is totally not what Judaism believes in. This is totally not what Judaism is. When a husband and wife are intimate with each other, they are supposed to be mind, body, soul, all together with each other, not dressed in clothes, fully passionate. There was no kissing there, no foreplay, it's horrific. Obviously you're supposed to, this is the ultimate expression of love, and love even more than lust. Was supposed to be an absolute union between husband and wife, and that was really, in fact, as part of the Chabad, the marriage contract, a husband is supposed to provide for his wife and you know, finances and whatever it is, food, clothing, and to give her pleasure, to satisfy her sexual needs. That is something that's of utmost importance in Jewish religion. She's supposed to, in fact, he's supposed to almost set the mood kind of thing. You know, usually when men get into bed, they can get straight to the point pretty quickly. It doesn't take them long. But for a woman, it's important that the husband sets that he has patience with her and he sets the tone. And you know, we can be distracted if we had, in fact, if you had an argument that day, or you're not allowed to be with each other unless it's fully with love and passion, and you're in it together. If you haven't had a good day together and you shouldn't be together. So Judaism views exactly the opposite, thinking, oh my God, I hope nobody thinks that's what all Orthodox couples do, because they don't. It's exactly the opposite. In fact, one of the beautiful things about Jewish tradition is the laws of mikvah. So it's a whole night on its own that we can spend on mikvah, but basically for what you've seen in mikvah is before the wedding, but after the wedding, when a woman menstruates and 7 days afterwards, she is in the relationship with her husband is, continues to be as normal. However, they press pause on the physical relationship. And once she immerses in the mikvah, which is a beautiful time, a me time, a time of spirituality, and a beautiful time of renewal. When she comes back, it's like a mini honeymoon. They press play again on the physical relationship, and it's exciting and it's beautiful. Like, you know, every therapist will tell you, you know, you're having problems in your intimate life, you know, take a break. And this is like a God-given break every month in our life. And the other thing is that there's two aspects. Yes, you have to have there's a mitzvah, there's a biblical commandment of procreation, but that's not the only reason why you have intimacy. You have intimacy when a woman is pregnant, when she's menopausal, if she's nursing, or anything else she's doing. It's part of a married life. It's part of the expression. So it definitely isn't it's an accurate scene for her, but it's definitely not an accurate scene of Judaism. Have I?
You've done a miraculous job of shedding some light. I wanted to, running out of time, unfortunately. We could speak until tomorrow, you know that we could, but let's get to some questions now from our amazing audience that we've got here. One of the questions that has been put by one of our anonymous attendees this evening is, what is it in your life that you do now that you find so empowering?
I'll tell you what's empowering. I think one of the main teachings of the Rebbe's were, I think he was the first feminist, so to speak, that we have a Chabad house, we have a shul, and me amongst thousands of other ones, and it's not the rabbi that runs the shul, it's not the rabbi that runs, it's together, it's both of us. And I feel like we're equal CEOs in this big enterprise. And every day, every day I feel so empowered that every day when I wake up, there's meaning, there's passion, there's something like I wake up and everything that I do has, and I love it. I love it. I can talk to you. I would have never, ever been in that. In fact, that was one of the things that came up in the reunion, that oh, wow. Like, so that's what I actually absolutely opened up a whole new world for me.
What happens to those who choose to leave the community? Is there support for people who go, this is a parlance that's used in the Hasidic community, off the derech, which means literally off the path. So for people who deviate, your story is so unique in that you've lived a life of orthodoxy and you've lived a life of rich Judaism. A lot of people who leave communities like this leave and have a completely secular existence and very much removed from Judaism. What support do
it's an excellent question. It's a very important question because it's a question that actually happens every single day. So I just want to differentiate what happens in these communities and what happens in a lot of communities that I know, including my own. So when they leave the community, it's really hard for them because many of them get married. Their opinions and viewpoints on life, they're trapped. They might have 2-3 kids already. They can't leave. So some of them don't actually leave, and they'll have, you know, kind of a double life, so to speak. They'll stay in the community, but, you know, do their own thing privately. So the risk of them leaving is they have no skills. They have no English. They're not accepted by a majority. Obviously, there's an exception. But the majority of them won't accept them back into the communities because they're scared that they'll affect the rest of the family, or there will be an influence to the rest of the family. They're also worried that it will be something that will, you know, put a mark on their family, and they'll have a problem with marrying off the rest of the children. So often these children leave with no support, and therefore their English is, and they have no skills either. There are organizations these days, even one in Melbourne and overseas, that support children, not necessarily help them make a decision, but support them, teach them English, teach them a skill, which helps them, which stops them from going into the wider world without falling into a trap of drugs or anything else. It's actually a real worry and a real danger. So that's in their communities. I don't get that. I must be very, very honest. I don't, and it's actually emotional because a child is a child. It's about respect. It's about the relationship. A child should never, ever be distant from his family, from her parents, or anyone, in fact. They chose that life, and they have to be supported in whatever they've chosen. They know that that's not our way of life. I don't think that's a worry about influencing younger children, because if it's a happy home and the relationship is positive and the relationship is good, it doesn't matter. That's what really, that's the bottom line, in my opinion. So that's what I think when they say off the derech. I think everyone has to be supported in whatever they choose.
Esther Malka, is it reasonable to tell your story without fear of sullying an entire community? You know, growing up in a Jewish community, we were all told, you know, from the day we were born, you know, we don't air our dirty laundry. We've had enough persecution. There's been enough bad history. We certainly don't need to add to any detractors of our people or of our kind. So, you know, watching Unorthodox was interesting in that respect, because recently I saw a documentary that was done by Eve Ash called Man on the Bus. And in that documentary, I mean, as a former filmmaker, I can tell you that when you do a documentary as compared to a film or a series like Unorthodox, you don't always know where the beginning, the middle and the end is going to end up, right? Often the story evolves as you're actually filming it. Mm-hmm. So her story was doing a story about her parents, and she'd uncovered posthumously, because they had passed away and they were Holocaust survivors, that her mother had lived a double life, and that she in fact was not the biological child of the father she adored, but rather her mother had had an affair for some 15 years. It was compelling viewing, and it was featured at the Jewish Film Festival. And as I walked out, I was just overwhelmed. As somebody who's been passionate about documentaries all my life, I was just like overwhelmed at how compelling it was. But I heard the mutterings of the audience, and it was like, what a shanda, what a shame. How could she have aired her dirty laundry? How could she have vilified her mother in such a way? Clearly her mother didn't want that exposed. And I just thought, you know, does somebody like Deborah Feldman or Deborah Feldman have a right to tell their truth? Do they have a right to tell their story without fear of recrimination or fear that they have completely vilified and slandered the community from which they come? What do you think about that?
It's a very good question. In my opinion, I think everybody has a right to tell their story. And I think everybody has a right to if it gives one person the courage to do what they really, who they truly are, and who they really want to be, then that's okay. And I think more than that, I think we don't like hearing our own dirty laundry, so to speak. Nobody does. But at the same time, a lot of these stories raise a huge amount of awareness. And even though it doesn't, they have never watched Unorthodox. But I think, like I said before, I think slowly things are changing. And that's because there's a lot of awareness, and that's on every topic. I think it's important to do that. If you can be respectful, you should be as respectful as you can. But at the same time, awareness is a very powerful thing, and awareness brings on change. So I think it's important.
Okay. One of our audience, big difference in the Adus community and the Satmar community. Can you briefly be able to give us
so the Adus community here, the Adus community here is like kind of a bunch of small communities, Hasidic communities, all together in one. Not necessarily Satmar. Satmar, it's Belz, it's Visions, it's all different communities. However, recently they have broken away from the Adus community and became their own entity, so to speak, and opened their own shul, and they have a school on North Road called Divrei Emina. So they're more extreme even than Adus.
Okay, I've got a very eager participant who asked me to please ask you this. Do you believe Satmar is a cult? As a Jewish woman and a mother, this person asking the question says, I feel the shunning, the rules, the power and the ability to shelter the community is very reminiscent of a cult. What do you say to that?
I don't think it's a cult. I think when you talk about a cult is they actually have no ability to exit the cult. So I think it's a very insular community, but I think if somebody really wants, they can leave the community. And therefore, I don't think it's a cult. That's not my belief. I think it's a very insular community, but not a cult.
Is the Satmar community, or any Hasidic community for that matter, likely to be moved and indeed irrevocably altered because of the portrayal in Unorthodox, which has literally been watched by millions and millions and millions of people, Jews and non-Jews alike, of every conceivable denomination? Is this likely to impact the way that they run their community?
I wouldn't think Unorthodox will make a difference because it's one novel, one woman's story, and they have, so many years behind them and hundreds and thousands of members. However, like I did say, I do think that Unorthodox and a lot of similar stories, even if it's children that are have left the Satmar community, all these little things together, they will change to a certain degree. They might still remain insular, but maybe even more tolerant. They might still speak Yiddish, but, you know, understand another language too. So they might have a more, hopefully the balance will become a little bit more, and I've seen that with my own family. They've come around, so to speak. Yeah.
A lot of the audience and the audience in general have been talking about unorthodox in recent time, and a lot of people are very, very eager to know how this case with Malka Leifer will end. This, for those who don't know, is a woman within a Hasidic sect who left the country under the worst cloud of abuse against girls in the community. And coming from you, your opinions will count incredibly as far as what justice you think needs to be meted out to a person who has allegedly committed some of the most heinous crimes against girls.
It's horrific. It's actually horrific. I hope sooner rather than later, because the court case has gone on for more years than it should have gone on. They bring her back, she comes back, and she sits behind bars forever. She is, it's such, it's terrible. It's terrible for the victims. It's terrible for the families. It's terrible for anyone that has been affected and even heard that story. It's the worst crime ever. It doesn't only affect the victims, it affects their families, and it affects generations. Hopefully it won't, but so it's actually horrific. But I must say, to me, what upset me the most is at the time when she was sent away, one of my daughters had a classmate that moved from Adas to Beth Rivka. And my daughter
so can I just interject, because I'm just conscious of the people watching tonight. Malka Leifer was a principal of a school in Melbourne called Adas. And so the child you're speaking of was an alleged victim of hers and moved from that school to another Orthodox school, but from a different community, from a Chabad school.
A Chabad school. She wasn't a victim, she was a student at the Adas school.
Oh, she was a student in the school, forgive me.
So my daughter came home to me and said to me, what did Malka Leifer do? Can you explain it to me? So I did, and I told her exactly what happened. Well, not exactly, I wasn't there, but what possibly happened. And she said, oh my God, that's terrible. But what upset her more is that she was told from her classmate that Malka Leifer has been inappropriate and touched girls in places where it should normally be covered because of modesty, like the elbows and the knees. So that is the most horrific thing I've ever heard, because if the girls are not educated and there's no awareness and there's no education what that means, then how are we going to move forward? That's what worried me the most. I don't know if that changed, and it probably didn't. But I hope with awareness and bringing Malka Leifer back, it will make a huge difference and it will bring change.
Because we're going to have to wrap up, sweet question. They have asked, if someone was to play your life story in a movie, who would you like to play you, Esther Malka?
I think I'd like to be myself.
Oh,
I think so. If
fantastic.
I ever get chosen, I think so. I'm quite happy and comfortable, and where my life how my life has turned out. So I'm quite comfortable with my own self.
Fantastic.
Good question.
Look, we have gone considerably over, so regrettably we might have to leave it there. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us this evening and for adding such insight and meaning to this conversation. Esther Malka, may you and Mendy and your gorgeous family be blessed with many years of health and strength to continue illuminating from your platform. We've all been immeasurably enriched tonight because of your candour, your courage and your immense grace. We also want to give a huge shout out to the wonderful Tony Clappish, because without his IT expertise and extraordinary generosity, we literally wouldn't be with you this evening. We want to wish you all a wonderful night and have a lovely Shavuot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tammi and Tony. Thank you for, like I said, I've never said this, I've never spoken about my life to such a big audience, and thank you everybody for joining. I just want to add one thing, that I'm sure there are lots and lots of questions perhaps that haven't been answered, or questions that you have about Judaism. So there's an amazing website called Chabad.org. Judaism and in fact human nature is all about growth and understanding and learning and questioning. So please go on that website if you have any questions. Hopefully it will be answered. And if you want to contact me via Facebook, thank you very much.
Good night.